the other big pieces of equipment that we need to talk about in the shop is the bandsaw. We have two bandsaws. I'm going to show you the operation of one of them currently, and then we'll talk a little bit more in person about the operation of the other. They're pretty much identical, except this one here happens to be a lot bigger than the other one. So a bandsaw is essentially what it sounds like. It is a saw, and the band or the blade is an actual band. Right? On this particular machine, this saw has a 15-foot band that runs all the way up over this wheel, down through the table, and then down through another wheel on the bottom and back up. And it just goes in a big loop while we're cutting. All right? So, very efficient machine. It tends to be one of the more safer machines that we have in the shop. Okay? We talk a little bit about kickback area. The blade is going down through the table so that anything we're cutting wants to be pushed down onto this table, which is very stable and is very safe for us to go ahead and operate. A couple of things that we want to pay attention to though while we're operating this machine is setting the guard correctly and where we're standing. So when we're cutting a board on the bandsaw, right, we want to make sure that the guard and the guide wheels, which is this whole assembly right here, is as close to the height of the board as we can get it. These wheels right here help keep the blade from deflecting too much during operation. And then obviously the guard is meant to cover as much of the blade as we can so that we don't inadvertently run our hands into that exposed blade. So to set this, what we're going to do is unlock the guard by turning this hand wheel back here. This is our lock. Again, a little bit. This will raise and lower. Make sure you unlock this before you move the guard up or down. So I'm just going to bring this down. There's no specific number that we're looking to hit. Okay, we want it as close to the board as we can get it, but still be able to maneuver the board, okay, all the way around underneath the guard. If we're going to be particularly concerned with cutting curves and arcs on the bandsaw, so we want to make sure we can maneuver the board completely. So I'm pretty close. I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to lock this. Again, 2 fingers is all it takes to keep that in place. You will not need to be concerned about adjusting these guide wheels. We will adjust them and make sure that they are set correctly. You just need to make sure you move the guard up and down dependent upon the thickness of material that you are cutting. The other couple of safety things we want to watch out for is where you stand on the bandsaw or when you're operating. Anytime you're going to operate, you're going to want to be over here. Right? We're in front. We can see the path that we're cutting. We can see the blade. Okay, keep an eye on what we're doing. On-off switches over here as well, so we're close to that if we need to get to it in an emergency. The one place we definitely do not want to stand when we're operating or watching somebody operate the bandsaw is right here, right, to the very right of the saw. You have to remember that there's a 15-foot long saw blade in here. Okay, there are, I don't know, a couple hundred teeth on it. If the blade on this machine breaks, which happens more than you'd think, okay, the momentum is going to push the blade off of this housing and down onto the table, and it could force it to snake its way out to the right-hand side. So if I happen to be standing here and this blade snaps and it comes squirting out this way, I've got 15 feet of very sharp saw blade headed in my direction. Obviously, if I'm standing here, that's going to go that way, and I'm not going to be in harm's way. Not something I'm super concerned about, but it's something you need to be aware of. Most of the time when a blade break, it gets contained in either the upper or lower housing, and it doesn't come flying out. But in the event that that does happen, that is where that saw blade is going to go. So we want to make sure we are standing in the very front of the machine or on the back side of the machine, never milling around over here. All right, a couple other safety things we want to be concerned with is the type of stock that we cut. For the bandsaw, we want to make sure that we are cutting square or flat stock. Okay, something that will sit flat on the table. If we try to cut something cylindrical, like this dowel rod, and we try to do it freehand, we run a very significant risk of causing this to be grabbed and pulled from our hands and flung around by the bandsaw. And I'll show you why here with the way or the physics behind this cut. If I go to cut this piece of material, you'll notice that the very first spot that it gets contacted by the blade, there is nothing directly underneath the board to prevent that from rolling like this. Okay, so what could happen is as this blade is spinning, it's going to take this and grab it and just spin this dowel rod on me. Now conversely, on a flat piece of stock, right, wherever the cut is happening, there is material directly supported by the table. Okay, so we're never going to cut cylindrical stock. And to that effect as well, we're never going to try and cut anything up here, you know, hanging out in space. Anytime we're operating this machine, board goes down on the table, right, to make sure that our cut is as stable as it can be. Okay? If you try and cut something up here, it's just going to rip it out of your hands and cause damage to the machine and a possible injury to yourself. Let's talk about how we're going to operate this machine. For the WoodTech 1 project where we do the table, you're going to use the machine to cut a gentle arc on your lower rails, both the long and the short rails. Most of the time people are using the bandsaw to cut decorative patterns and using it to cut curvy lines. We're not typically using this machine to cut straight lines. We're going to use it for something irregular. So step one is of course to set your guard height. So again, loosen the guard back here, bring the guard down until you are close to your board. Okay, but you can still manage to maneuver it without it contacting the guide at all. Lock it. Again, 2 fingers is all it takes. And you are set in terms of your setup. Now, we're going to cut this gentle arc here. Now, depending upon the thickness of the blade, this is a very thick blade right now. It's something like 3/4 of an inch thick. The thicker the blade, the less you can turn. Okay, so in a case like this, okay, this turn, I might be able to do it, but to be safe, what I want to do is put in what are called relief cuts. And basically what I want to do is take this very long curve cut and break it up into 4 smaller cuts. So I'm going to cut a relief cut close to my line and cut a relief cut in here and in here. And then what I'm going to do is think about this cut in 1 cut, remove this piece, a 2nd cut, remove this piece, 3rd cut, remove it, 4th cut, remove it. Rather than try and make this curve all at once, I want to try and make sure that I stack the cards in my favor and I don't end up overturning on the blade and causing the blade to bind or break. So relief cuts are going to help us out here. If you're using a smaller blade or a thinner blade, you probably don't need them for something this gentle, or the ones that you're going to see on your table project. You probably wouldn't need them, but for this particular example, because the blade is so thick, I'm going to go ahead and put these in. So I'm going to stand in front of the machine. Again, we want to avoid the right hand side. On button is the middle of the red donut here. I'm going to let it come up to full speed before I start cutting. I'm going to make my relief cuts straight in and then straight back out, and then proceed to cut my curve. So now it's at full speed. I'm going to go ahead and make my relief cuts. I want to stop short of my line and back straight up. I have to back up the exact same path that I came in on. If I came in and tried to back out with a turn, I'm going to grab the blade and pull it off of its wheels. So I'll make my next relief cut. Stop short of my mark, back straight up. Okay, so now what I've done is I've provided a place for me to cut chunks of material out of my long curve to make it easier to maneuver this piece. So for my first cut, I'm going to cut this little sweep right here. We always want to try and leave the line on our keep piece. So this part right here is what I'm concerned with. Whatever happens to these pieces here, I could care less. So I'm going to try and line myself up and very gently stay close to my line, but don't go over it. And as I'm pushing forward, I'm turning the workpiece. There, I hit my first relief cut. Now I've removed all that material. Okay, don't use your fingers to retrieve the waste. Okay, use something to get it out of the way. But now all this is gone, so now I have a lot more room to set up for this cut. Okay, it's the same thing. Close to the line, but never over it. If you start getting close to your line, don't panic. Just stop. Okay, shut the machine off and back out of your cut if that happens. The worst thing you can do is be in the middle of a cut and panic and start spinning this thing around. All you're going to do is bend or break the blade and cause it to come off with a wheel. Okay, watch where you're putting your fingers. Notice now that this hand is in line with the blade, it's come off. I don't want to run into that blade. Okay, shut the machine off. This one takes a while to coast to a stop. Okay, we just got to be aware of that. But now you can see, I've cut my arc. I've left the line. Now I can go to another machine and get it sanded nicely to that line that I want. Okay, but I broke it down into smaller pieces rather than trying to fuss over a very long arch cut. I fussed over really short, pretty much straight cuts to get that.